In the 17th century, Europe stood at the crossroads of history, a continent in flux, where tradition clashed with innovation, and power dynamics shifted like the winds of change. From the splendor of the Renaissance to the turmoil of religious conflict, this was a time and place that shaped the modern world. How's it, young Stashers? My name is Dr. Jacob Seidnote. This is Stashy, and you're watching The Historian Stash. Now, Europe in and around the year 1600 is a wild ride.
What a ride, what a ride, what a ride.
So strap yourselves in and let's hoy.
It's about to go down.
By the 1500s, European society was governed by what is known as the feudal system, where land ownership determined one's wealth and position in society. This system was introduced by this oak called William I, who also happened to be King of England.
King of the who?
The Britons.
Who are the Britons?
Well, we all are. We are all Britons. And I am your king.
I didn't know we had a king. I thought we were an autonomous collective.
King William I realized that he would not be able to rule and control the entire country on his own. So he decided to divide the land and lease it to those people who were loyal to him and could provide him with the services and resources he needed to govern the country. And so the feudal system was born. The land belonged to the king, which he could divide between the church and lease out the land to subjects who swore an oath of loyalty to him and him alone. This pyramid gives a visual representation of how the feudal system actually worked. At the top of the feudal system, the king ruled the country.
Well, I am king.
Oh, king, eh? Very nice. And how'd you get that, eh? By exploiting the workers. By hanging on to outdated imperialist dogma which perpetuates the economic and social differences in our society.
He leased out land to trustworthy, wealthy and powerful men called barons. These barons were given power and lands, which were called manors. So barons were also given the title Lord of the Manor. The Lord of the Manor had to employ a bunch of buts called knights, whose job it was to protect the king, country, and the land given to them. Peasants were employed to produce essential goods such as food and clothing. The knights were also wealthy and owned land on which they allowed peasants to farm and produce necessary products. The peasants made up the bottom of the feudal system, providing cheap labor for the king, lords, and knights.
Come and see the violence inherent in the system! Help, help! I'm being repressed! Bloody peasant! Oh, what a giveaway! Did you hear that? Did you hear that, eh?
Talk about a pyramid scheme.
It's not a pyramid scheme. It's not even a scheme per se. It's
During the 16th century, European women were mostly uneducated managers of their household who focused on the needs of their family. Unmarried women were viewed as strange, and they were often sent off to a convent and forced to become nuns. Women were not allowed to be involved in politics, trade, the law, or as a leader in the church. Even investing in the education of women was also frowned upon, as Europeans believed that it would take away a woman's innocence. Yet, women could write autobiographies and study the Bible. Women who were opposed to this patriarchal system were excluded from and often persecuted by society. Now, obviously, we have come far as a society in the advancement of women's rights. But then again, we still have this in some parts of the world. About 250 years before 1600, the world's deadliest pandemic broke out. The Black Death, otherwise known as the Black Plague or Magna Mortalitas, the Great Mortality, was a deadly bubonic plague that likely originated in northeastern China.
China?
Coincidence? I think not!
Killing maybe 5 million people quickly. It moved west through India, Syria, and Mesopotamia. In 1346, it hit a trading port called Kafar in the Black Sea. Ships departing Kafar were full of trading goods and rats who carried fleas. These fleas carried deadly bacterium called Yersinia pestis. In October 1347, 12 ships from Kafar docked at Messina in Sicily. To the local people's shock and horror, the ship's hulls were full of dead and dying sailors. By the time they realized what the ships carried, it was already too late. Over the next 5 years, the Black Death killed 30 to 60% of the total population of Europe. And the way it killed wasn't pretty either. The name of the illness was derived from a specific symptom called acral necrosis, where the infected person's skin turned black because of the hemorrhages which took place under the skin. Other symptoms included swelling of the armpits, neck, and groin, and coughing up blood. The victim would die usually within 5 days of being infected. In total, the Black Death killed anywhere between 75 to 200 million people. This is staggering when you think that the world population at the time is estimated to be around 400 million. So even if we take the lowest estimation of deaths, it's still 19% of the total world population. That's crazy.
The phrase quarantine was coined in Venice in the early 15th century based on a 40-day period of isolation. But the city of Ragusa, present-day Dubrovnik, was the first to implement a plague quarantine back in 1377. This plague quarantine lasted for 30 days.
Now, the first effect of the Black Death was quite obviously depopulation. Historians indicate that between a third and a half of the European population died between 1348 to 1350 alone. The plague was very random in its killing. For example, rural areas would not be affected because of the low populations. But then in other instances, small dorpies would have high mortality rates of up to 40%. In larger cities, people were more vulnerable to disease transmissions due to close living quarters, dense population, and unsanitary living conditions.
Bring out your dead! Here's one. Ninepence.
I'm not dead.
What?
Nothing. Here's your ninepence. I'm not dead.
But some cities, like Milan, Italy, came out of the Black Death virtually unscathed. However, generally speaking, towns and cities didn't escape the plague, and they were forced to dig mass graves for burial, and many towns lost the majority of their population.
He says he's not dead.
Yes, he is. I'm not.
He isn't.
Well, he will be soon. He's very ill. I'm getting better.
No, you're not. You'll be stone dead in a moment.
A second consequence, which is quite surprising, but also not really, was anti-Semitism. Now, anti-Semitism means the hostility towards or discrimination against Jews as a religious, ethnic, or racial group. During the Black Death, people became increasingly suspicious of outsiders, especially Jews. This Jewish persecution and suspicion also intensified due to religious differences and Jews living separately in Jewish ghettos, apart from Europeans. So in other words, because they had a different faith and lived separately from everyone else, they were suspected of starting a deadly plague. Ridiculous, right? Well, this conspiracy theory led to Jews being banished from cities. In many instances, Jews were even killed in large numbers. In 1351, more than 350 massacres of Jews had occurred, while 60 large and 150 smaller Jewish communities had been exterminated. Unfortunately, this was not an isolated phenomenon and would be repeated for centuries to come. Before the Black Death, Europe was overpopulated and lacked the resources to feed the entire population. But after the Black Death, approximately half of the European population had been wiped out, so the competition for resources such as food and land virtually ceased to exist. Economic historians believe that the roots of capitalism can actually be found in the Black Death, as workers who were previously cheap laborers could compete for higher wages and could demand more freedom after the plague. The decline in population also led to a rise in per capita wealth. In an effort to stop the spread of the Black Death, most European countries prohibited exportation of food while setting price controls on essential foods such as grain and outlawing large-scale fishing. These rules proved problematic as they were either unenforceable or led to a shortage to buy grain. England particularly suffered from crop failures and were unable to import grain from France. Many Europeans believed that God had sent the Black Death as punishment. People became increasingly aware of their mortality, and many became obsessed with the idea of death. However, as the Black Death continued to spread, Europeans became increasingly cynical about religion, as the Catholic Church could not cure their symptoms as they promised they would. After the Black Death, European artists constantly portrayed morbid scenes. Skeletons suffering death, darkness, and depression were constantly depicted in European paintings during the 1350s. There's even a church in Czechia called the Cedric Ossuary that has been decorated with the bones of those who died during the Black Death. I guess the church is permanently run by a skeleton crew. During the Black Death, Europeans became increasingly aware that the medieval practice of alchemy could not heal them. This caused many to move away from alchemy. Rather, Europeans resorted to actually buying spells and charms, as well as alcohol, which they thought would help them heal from the Black Death. So instead of proto-science, they chose black magic and got drunk to get through the plague. Sounds reasonable.
But let me tell you something. We live in a terrible place and time.
At the start of the 15th century, sailors had limited knowledge of the world since they continued to use maps based on the cartography of the ancient Alexandrian geographer Ptolemy, a dude who died way back in the year 168. So his stuff was a little outdated. By the 1400s, Europeans had already explored and documented Western Asia and the Mediterranean, but knowledge of Africa was limited, and they still hadn't found the Americas yet. Traveling was also limited because of the poor ship designs and primitive navigational techniques. But this all changed during the course of the 1400s. The Portuguese created the ocean-going caravel with new navigational instruments and techniques that enabled them to determine how far north or south they had journeyed by measuring the height of the sun at noon and the height of a star at night. One of the major highways for trade was the Baltic Sea during the Middle Ages. The Baltic Sea enabled Europeans to travel and trade with each other. The German Hansa merchants mostly traded fish, softwood, timber, hemp, grain, and flax. Russia and Finland traded honey, fur, tar, and amber. After the European Age of Discovery, Europeans were able to travel and trade with other continents such as Africa, Asia, and America. At the start of the 1600s, Dutch and English trading companies were established that had exclusive rights to conduct large-scale trade with various parts of the world, including Asia, Africa, and the Americas. The Renaissance occurred roughly between the 15th and 17th centuries. Historians describe this period as a transition from the ancient to the modern world. The term comes from the French word renaissance, which means rebirth. The Renaissance actually has its roots in the early 13th century and was based on the ideas of St. Francis of Assisi and his female companion St. Clare. The ideas differed from Christian theology of the time and focused on the beauty and spirituality of nature. You could say they were medieval hippies who chose to be poor and dependent on God and His gifts rather than worldly fame and fortune. The ideas inspired Italian artists to view and portray the world differently. So, after the Black Death, people also started to question the Church's teachings and focus on the afterlife. Having survived one of the world's most horrific tragedies, people started to develop humanist philosophies, focused on enjoying the present moment. This new YOLO attitude led to the birth of the Renaissance, which brought innovation and change in art, science, and technology. For example, the development of humanist ideologies focused on scientific inquiry and finding fulfillment in nature rather than following the Catholic Church's teachings about God. Artists were inspired by Greek and Roman art, which portrayed elements of the humanist philosophy with a three-dimensional and realistic look. Painters moved away from portraying religious themes to painting landscapes and people. Literature moved away from religion and started to emphasize humanist themes and classical ideals. The printing press, developed by Johannes Gutenberg in 1440, enabled people to print and widely disseminate literature for the first time. New musical instruments were developed, such as the violin family, and the printing press enabled music sheets to become widely disseminated. Another consequence was the fall of feudalism and the rise of a middle class and capitalist market economy. Also, explorers like Christopher Columbus became increasingly curious about the world around them and set out to explore new trade routes and discover new lands. Scholars also had a renewed interest in studying scientific fields such as medicine, mathematics, geography, alchemy, and architecture. New innovative technological developments included the invention of cast iron, the shotgun, the screwdriver, the portable clock, and the rifle barrel. Then you had Galileo, who developed the telescope and proved the theory of the heliocentric solar system, which declared that the Earth revolved around the Sun. This flew in the face of the Catholic Church's view, and these scientific theories were condemned by the Church. Meanwhile, in the cities and towns of Europe, commerce flourished as never before. The rise of global trade brought exotic spices, textiles, and treasures from distant lands, enriching both merchants and consumers. The spirit of enterprise fueled innovation, leading to advances in finance, industry, and the exploration that laid the groundwork for the modern economy. Culture also thrived. Theaters, galleries, and salons buzzed with creativity as artists, writers, and thinkers pushed the boundaries of expression. From the timeless dramas of Shakespeare to the groundbreaking scientific theories of Galileo, the 17th century was a golden age of intellect and imagination. But amid the cultural renaissance and economic prosperity, Europe was also torn apart by conflict. Religious divisions, territorial disputes, and power struggles plunged the continent into a series of devastating wars. The 30 Years' War, the English Civil War, and other conflicts exacted a heavy toll, leaving a legacy of destruction and despair that would shape the course of history for generations to come. As the 17th century drew to a close, Europe stood on the threshold of a new era. The echoes of the past reverberated through the corridors of time, reminding us of the triumphs and tragedies that defined this tumultuous age. That's it for now. If you haven't done so already, please swipe the like, share and subscribe buttons. I really appreciate all your support. Until next time, from Stashy and myself, stay stashy.